Hello, welcome to this video looking at Rhino, and in this video we're going to be looking at the graphic user interface, so a quick introduction to the layout of the screen. When you first open Rhino, you get this pop-up window where you can select a type of template which you're going to open. Please note that there are units attached to these, so I tend to work using large objects millimeters or small object millimeters depending on what I'm building, so I stick to millimeter units. Mine's set to default out at small object millimeter, that's why that's bold there. But while we're here, you can also see recent files that I've had open, so if you're working on your own desktop or laptop, you'll see these as well, and you don't need to worry about the rest of them. At the moment I have got a small object millimeters template open. So a quick overview of the layout. As default, we get a panel on the right hand side, we get 4 views, we get a command bar along the top, and we get various drop down menus here, and we have various tabs along here. So I guess the easiest way to explain it would be to say that there are many ways of getting at the same tools and same functions depending on how you like to use the interface. For instance, if I go to curve drop down, you'll see that there is a line command, and I've got lots of different options for line drawing. Escape out of that. I've also got a line segment part of this toolbar here, and if I was to go along here to curve tools, I've got more line commands. So lines are called curves in Rhino. So you see there are a few ways of getting at it. I could also just start typing the word line. I got to N of line and it found that I wanted to draw a line. Okay, so the same is true for the other commands, and you either get to know the commands by name and you can just start typing it. I find that's the quickest, but you'll get into it and you'll develop your own way of doing it. I'm going to draw a rectangle for now on the floor, and you'll see it shows up in all 3 windows as well as the window I drew in, and I can select it and it's selected in there. I'm scrolling in and out using my mouse scroll. I'm pressing the right button to orbit around, and if I hold shift when I press the right button I get a pan. So it's worth having an experiment with some of these options here just to start getting familiar with moving around this 3-dimensional space. If you get lost and you've zoomed right in and you can't find your way, on this standard toolbar, this button here zooms extents for all viewports. So if you right click on there, it creates the object to fill the viewport. So what have we got here? Top view, perspective, front and right. Now I use this tool here called Gumball, and we're going to get into that a little bit later, but I'm going to turn it on now just to show you what happens if I move in the green axis, which is the y-axis. You see I'm moving along this green line here in 3-dimensional and 2-dimensional space. At the moment I've also got grid snap turned on. Now we're going to talk about grids a little bit later. These are millimeter grids, so every move I'm moving 1 millimeter, which is quite a nice way of controlling things when you're first getting started. You can also see if I'm looking from the side, I've got a very thin blue line because I'm seeing it from the side on, but I can move it up and down in those views as well as doing it in the 3D view. I can't do that in the top view because I haven't got this blue arrow to grab hold of. Okay, I'm going to select this rectangle and hit delete. We're going to talk about selection again in a minute. The viewports, you can work like this where you can see all 4 views, or you can double click on the viewport tab or name at the top and that expands that view, so you can work in that view and then jump out. So double clicking double clicking back out becomes second nature to using this software. It's very useful to jump from viewport to viewport. The object that I've created here, this circle, is located on the origin. Now, if you don't understand what an origin is, this three-dimensional virtual space has got a datum point, a start point, and that is 0, 0 and 0. So 0 in the X or red, 0 in the Y and 0 in the Z, which is the blue. And so any object in here is related to where 0 is. So if I was to start a line and I said 100, 100 for its first point, I'm going to start with a point 100 millimeters away from the origin in that direction and 100 millimeters away in that direction. Now if I was to draw a second line, if I wrote 200, 200, I'm going to get 200 mil away from the origin in both X and Y. So those are Cartesian coordinates, and that's one way of inputting, but every time I inputted I had to understand where 0 was. If I was to do, say, a random click where I'm not defining where the first point is, but I wanted that same length of line, 100 mil by 100 mil in the X and Y, I would have to type at. So using the at command, 100, 100, and that makes the second point relative to the first point, so I get the same result. So we'll quickly talk about selection. So if you've not been following along, use some of these tools to just stick a bunch of shapes on the screen, because we need to select things next. So selection works in a couple of ways. You can select by just clicking on objects, but if you notice, if I just click on the next object, if I was trying to select both of these and I'm just clicking on them with a left click, I'm deselecting the first one as I'm reselecting the second one. I could hold shift and that adds to the selection, and I can hold shift again to, control to deselect from that selection. So shift adds to it, control deselects. So that's one way of selecting. Another way would be to sweep select. If I come in and hold my left mouse button, I'm getting a solid rectangle, and that's an enclosing selection. That means that anything inside that selection box will get selected. If I do that again, but I don't fully enclose this bottom line, I'm only going to select the top one because this one wasn't fully enclosed. So left to right, you get an enclosing selection. Right to left, notice it's now dashed, you get a crossing selection. That means anything that this rectangle touches will be selected. Now, it might seem a little arbitrary at first, but these two different methods of selecting become very, very useful when models become complicated. The left to right one allows you to select individual objects when you've got quite a cluttered viewport. Right to left will select everything in your view, and that can often be quite difficult, and if you've got a very, very complicated model with maybe a terrain that's a couple of kilometers across, can occasionally crash your machine out. Okay, so I'm just going to select all of that and hit delete on my keyboard, and I'm going to use some solid okay, what did I just do there? I use this box, and if you expand that out, you've got a lot of primitive objects. These are called primitives. I'm going to make another box. I'm defining how large it is in that direction and then how tall it is. At the moment you see that it is in what's called wireframe. On my perspective tab here I have properties for this view, and at the moment it's set to wireframe, which is like a see-through view. There's also X-ray, where you can see through to the back there. Wireframe is quite useful. X-ray is very useful when you're working. Shaded, you now see you can't see behind it, and you're getting more of a rendered finish. But there is a rendered, which at the moment doesn't really pick up anything because it's only grey default. My layer, the material, is grey default. If I click on that though, make a change, you see the change. I've got materials in there. We're going to get into layers and materials later on. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the menus along the top here. I'm just going to get rid of those for now. So like I said, there is a curve drop down menu, and there are many different ways of creating lines, and depending on what you're trying to achieve, there is probably a type of input that will suit you. It's a long list and it takes quite a lot of learning to understand the capability of this software. It's extremely capable. Surfaces, again, some of the more useful ones here. Sweeping, we're going to get into that later on. Chamfers down here. Solids. Now, a solid is a closed set of surfaces, and we're going to get into that definition again in a subsequent video. But again, you can see that there are many options in here. Personally, I tend to work from these panels, or I know the name of it, so I'll start typing. I find it a lot quicker than using these drop downs. They can take quite a long time. But if you can't find what you're looking for in the icons, then this is sort of second place to go and have a look. Now, last we're going to do for this video is this grid itself. I mentioned earlier that these are millimeter grids. I've got grid snap turned on at the moment. I can change that, so if I just type in grid properties, snap spacing, minor line spacing, major interval spacing. So the minor lines are these ones here, the major ones are the centimeters. So it's saying there 10, 1, it extends for 100, so there's that out to 100. So you can change this to suit what you're doing. Depends on the size of the model that you're trying to create. Grid snapping can be a useful tool. It can also be a little bit cumbersome sometimes. It depends how you want to approach it and what sort of form you're creating. If it's a rectilinear form, this works very well. Curved forms, it doesn't tend to be quite so useful. But we could change that spacing, say 5 mil. So I'll just change the snap spacing there. So if I've got grid snap on, it hasn't changed visually what I'm doing, but you notice my snap is now only going to every 5 mil. So again, that can be useful. Okay, so what I would recommend doing before moving on from this video is have a little play inputting and selecting. And using the delete tool, and just get familiar with orbiting around. So please find the next video. Thanks very much.